Hello marketing research students, it's Dr. G. This video is the second in a series of 3 that gives you a step-by-step tutorial on how to explore the Titanic database that we are working on for assignment number 5, the Titanic data analysis. So as you recall, there's a couple of steps that you need to do before you start analyzing your data. The first thing we did was we made sure you had the analysis tool pack and loaded into your Excel, whether it's on a Mac or whether it's on a PC version. The second thing we did was we set up the actual code book and the data set that you will be using the Titanic data file that I had loaded into Canvas, which was right here. So you took this data file and you created one for yourself, you downloaded it, you named it with your first initial, last name, and then underscore Titanic, and you've been using that workbook now for one assignment. So just to refresh you, in terms of the assignment that we're working on, we are working on assignment number 5, the Titanic data analysis that is found here. Everything you need to know about the assignment is going right in this Canvas. And all of the tools that you need to use to navigate the assignment, tutorial videos, the data set, and some information how to load in the tool pack. It's all included here, including the worksheets that we're currently working on. So the assignment itself, you will upload 4 different pieces. You're going to upload this particular file, the Titanic data. This is your workbook that shows all of the different analyses that you're creating as we work through our practice of analyzing data in Excel using statistical methods. And then you have 3 other files that you are going to upload with that. Worksheet 1, which is descriptives, statistics, and that is the video that we just finished and what we did in class last time. The second is the correlation, which we will go over today. And then the third is going to be a regression analysis. So what I'd like you to do right now, as we start to look at correlation, is I'd like you to open up your Excel data file that you've been working on. Mine is right here. And you can see I already have some great analyses that we've been doing. Last time we did some descriptive statistics, we did some pivot tables, and so make sure you are on the data tab, and we are going to now go through a little tutorial on how to run some correlation statistics. So let's go back to Canvas for a second. So I want you to download right here this worksheet number 2. Download this, and all of the information that you're going to need to navigate this particular assignment will be on this sheet. You're also going to populate the information right in the worksheet that we are going to analyze from this database, and this will be part of your assignment number 3, the second piece of assignment number 3. So this is task 2 or worksheet number 2 that we're going to be working on. So make sure you have this up and loaded as we walk through this tutorial. As you'll know, the first page as always is just the instructions and how we got started. The second piece here is how we will go about running a correlation analysis. So let's just take a second to refresh ourselves on what correlation does. In statistics, dependence is any statistical relationship between 2 random variables or 2 sets of data. So what we are trying to do as we have a data set such as the Titanic survivor data set here, we're looking to see if there is a correlation or a dependence between 2 different relationships. So we want to see, is there a correlation between whether somebody lived and died and what passenger class they were in, or did they live and die versus the gender, or their age. So what we're trying to figure out, is there a correlation between two different variables? So if you think about this in a marketing or a product sense, one thing that you may want to look at as a marketer is there a correlation between the quality of a product and the price of the product? So for example, if you were to purchase a brand new vehicle, and that vehicle was a Toyota model year 2020, and you may have currently purchased, or your existing vehicle is a model 2010. So if you look at one variable being the year that the vehicle was made, 2010 or 2020, you might have an inference about the quality of those products. And then you might, we might ask you a question like, what are you willing to pay for a 2020 versus a 2010? So we would see whether the price you're willing to pay is positively or negatively correlated based on the model year of that product. So that's one example of how you could use correlation in a marketing context. So what we're going to do today is we are going to look at the database, and I want you to think about a couple of things as you're thinking through this. One is there's two different types of correlations. There's a direction as to a correlation. And a positive correlation is that the variable, as one variable increases, the other increases as well. So they both head in the same direction. Now a negative correlation is very different in that they have an inverse relationship, meaning that as one variable increases, the other decreases. So what really is the difference between the two? So think about an example such as alcohol use. So you might hypothesize that more a person or more people drink alcohol, the more likely smoking would increase. So in a positive correlation, if you look at alcohol use and smoking, a positive correlation would mean that yes, there is a dependence on those two, and as one increases, the amount of alcohol you consume, smoking increases as well. So let's look at a negative correlation example. One correlation that could be is, let's say intuitively, you know that, or you hypothesize that the weight of a car and miles per gallon impact or have some sort of dependency. So you might hypothesize that the heavier the car, the less miles per gallon of gas that car is going to be able to consume, and from an efficiency perspective. So there is a negative correlation there in that the weight of the car increases, the miles per gallon decrease. So that's really the difference between the two. So I want you to keep that in mind as we look at correlations with the Titanic analysis. The other thing I want you to keep in mind is that we not only look at the direction of a correlation, we look at the strength. And the strength is around how it's about how strong that correlation is. So generally we look at, or we do look at, a correlation coefficient, which goes from a range of -1 to 1, meaning 0 is there's no correlation at all, there's no strength at all. But 1, whether it's negative or positive, is the strongest or a perfect correlation. So let's keep that in mind. What we're looking for is to see the closer to 1 between our Titanic variables will mean whether or not the strength of that correlation will be. So let's go back to our data set here. You have this open, it is your data set, and as you know, we've got some tabs here from our previous worksheets. So what we're going to do now is I want you to run what is called a correlation analysis. The way that you do that is you are going to select Data, data here on the Excel tab. And if you could recall, our data analysis toolkit is over there. And the dialog box opens up. What we are going to run for this analysis is a correlation. So go ahead and click on correlation and then hit OK. Now remember, these steps are in the worksheet. Follow them step by step and you'll have no problem at all. The next thing that you want to do is you want to select your data range. So for a correlation table, what I like to do is I like to start out looking at all of my data and all of the variables in a data set. Create a nice table that will show me of all these variables, is there a strong or a weak correlation or no correlation at all based on all of this information. So make sure that you've got all of your data selected. Also select that the labels are in the first row. You want to make sure that you've got those there. And we are going to name this, so here where it's new worksheet, PLY, we're going to name this correlation. And the reason we do this is it's going to populate into its own workbook. So let's hit OK on this then. We're done with this. And voila, there's a beautiful correlation table that we have here that just populated for us. And you'll see here, you named it correlation, it put it in its own little work tab there, worksheet. So let's take a look here at what we're seeing. So if you remember what I was discussing a minute ago, if you remember, no correlation at all between two variables is 0. And the further you get away from 0, or the closer you get to 1, whether it's negative or positive, is the strength of that correlation. So if you look here on your worksheet that I have here, that you're all working on, you just created a correlation table. And now I want you to tell me, looking at the correlation table that you just completed, which variables are positively correlated and which are negatively correlated. So if you look at this, let's look at the chart. This is how you read the chart. So each one of our variables, as you know, there's state, meaning you lived or died, passenger class, first, second, or third class ticket, gender, male or female, age, meaning how old are you, and then age range is a series of 4 different age ranges that I put age in just for my own analysis. So correlation table, what it does is it takes the first variable, state, and then it compares it to the other variables in the data set. So when you're looking at state and state, obviously it's the same set of data, so that is going to be perfectly correlated. It's the same data. So it'll be a 1. You can see passenger class, perfect. Gender, perfect, because we're just analyzing it against itself. So now we're going to analyze it. Analyzed state, whether somebody lived or died, and passenger class, were they in first, second, or third class. So this right here is the correlation between whether somebody lived and died and what ticket class they had. So you can see here that we have a correlation coefficient, is what it is called, and that coefficient is 0.32. So if you remember, the closer we get to 1, the more the stronger that correlation is. So if you were to look at the difference between 0 and 1, a 0.5 would be sort of a medium correlation, telling us, yeah, it is sort of correlated. But it's not super strong, it's not super weak. So what I want you to do as you're looking at your questions you need to answer, you need to tell me which of these are positively correlated of these different variables. So the way you can tell is if it's positively correlated it does not have a negative in front of it. So in this case, you've got two variables here that are negatively correlated: passenger class and age, and passenger class and age range. So when you're looking at this, you will see that there's an inverse relationship between as an age decreases, the passenger class, first, second, or third class, increases. So there is an inverse relationship there. If you look at whether somebody lived and died in their gender, so this is a positive relationship. So in our case, how we would interpret this would be, if you are a male, because male is number 2, female is number 1, the more males, there's a correlation between being male and female and whether you lived or died. So there's some correlation there. We'd have to dig a little a little bit further to figure out specifically what that means. We also know that if you look here at age, there's a relatively weak correlation. It's almost 0 based on age and whether you lived and died. So there really isn't a whole lot going on there. So if you're looking at this table here, passenger class and gender have the strongest correlation. So we do know that there is something going on there in their data that tells us that passenger class, whether you're first, second, or third class, has something to do with whether you lived or died, and the same with gender. So this is how you read a correlation table. So your questions on your worksheet that you are going to answer for me are as follows: which are positively correlated, which are negatively correlated, and which two sets of variables have the strongest correlation. So if we go back here and look at our data set, it looks like gender and state and passenger class and state have the strongest positive correlations. But here we've got age and gender class as a negative 40%. So if I were to look at how would I answer this, which have the strongest correlation, I'm probably going to say the strongest correlation is between age and passenger class. And then you're going to type in what that correlation is. It'd be negative 0.4. And then I would say, as I look at this, it looks like the very strongest is gender and whether they lived or died. So those are two interesting pieces of information that you can learn. So what I also want you to tell me about is, what does the information tell you regarding whether somebody lived or died? Does age really matter, whether they lived or died? I mean, is there a strong correlation there? Is there a low, medium, or high correlation between whether you're male or female and you live or die, or passenger class? So I want you to describe those to me. So that's the first part of doing a correlation analysis, is we're looking at direction and strength. But there's something else that's important for us to understand as we look at correlation. We want to determine whether or not the strength is statistically significant. So we do something called a t-test, or a paired two-sample for means, running a t-test. And so we are going to do that, and what the t-test is going to produce for us is a p-value. And a p-value is a significance level based on, if you recall, our alpha. And alpha is our 95% where we set our significant level at. Because in business we generally look at a 95% significance level. So let's take a look at how you're going to run the t-test, and then we'll analyze it in a minute. In order to run a t-test, you are going to select Data, Data Analysis, and then scroll through your dialog box and select a t-test paired to sample for means. So we're comparing means between each of these variables. I'll select OK on that. Oops, you know what? I need to be over here. Sorry. We need to be in our data set. I was still in the correlation table. So make sure when you run your data, you're in the right data, you're in the right worksheet. So the first thing that I'm going to do then after we set that up is I'm going to select a variable. And my variable, the thing that I want to understand is I want to understand the differences between means. So I'm going to select state as my first variable. Because if you recall, as we looked at the correlation table, there were a couple of correlations that were pretty high. So I am interested in understanding the difference between whether somebody lived and died So that's going to be my first variable. And then I want to look at, let's take a peek again at a correlation table. The other one, it was gender. So I want to look at whether somebody lived or died, state, and gender. So I am going to make my second variable passenger class. I know this is a slow-mo way of doing it, but I'm pretty picky about my data. I like to make sure I have everything selected properly. And then you're going to enter or click on the box. So we have selected here two variables, state and gender. You're going to select labels because I have labels in my value set. And here's what I want to show you. There's a couple things that you want to do. You want to enter a 0 in the hypothesized mean difference because we are trying to determine the difference in means related to 0. And then I also want you to look at our alpha. Our alpha here is 0.05. Because remember, we use a 95% significance level in our business analysis. Third thing I want you to do is to create a new worksheet. And in this worksheet, we are going to call this, it's getting a little tricky here now. We're getting a lot of worksheets, so we're going to have to, let's call this something to help us remind us of the variables we're using. Let's do t-test and the variable name. So let's do t-test, I'm going to do state and gender. This way when I analyze my t-test, I'm going to understand what I'm looking at. So hit OK there. And voila, see, there is my box. And I have just populated my t-test because we are looking for significance levels here. So when you have your t-test results here, there's a couple of things that I want you to look at. This Pearson correlation here is going to be the same value that you're going to find on the correlation table that you looked at. So I'm just going to highlight this so you can remember which one I'm looking at. That's the first thing. So this state and passenger state and it was gender should be the same value in our correlation table. State and passenger class. Sorry, it was passenger class. I did that wrong here. Shoot. I'm going to rename this passenger class. So you'll see your correlation here is 32. And it's the same as this. So it's the first thing. We already knew that this was sort of a lower, there is a correlation there, but it's a little bit lower. It's closer to 0 than it is to 1. And the second thing we're going to look at here, this is what is your p-value. And if you recall, the p-value is going to tell us how statistically significant this is. And how do we go about doing this? So if you remember, when we set up our means, when we set up our t-test, we used a correlation significance level, or we call that alpha, at a 0.05, because that is generally acceptable for business research. So what you want to look at here is that when you're looking at your p-value, if the p-value is less than your significance level, and ours was 0.05, that's what we set it at. We did a 0.05 significance, or alpha. This p-value is higher than 0.05. So when we look at that, when we see that p-value is higher, the p-value is not statistically significant because it is higher than our alpha of 0.05. So remember, the closer we are to 0, the stronger that significance is of that particular statistic. So in terms of the t-test for passenger data, there really isn't much significance there. So let's do that again. I know there was a lot going on there. So let's try running a t-test on gender like I wanted to in the first place. I kind of messed that up for you, sorry. I grabbed passenger class as a variable instead of gender. So let's run through this again. And what we're going to do this time is we are again going to go into data analysis. It's already selected for the t-test. We're going to continue to do the t-test. Look at this, it's remembering all of the things that I need. I'm still going to use my state as my variable, my first variable, but I'm going to change my next variable to gender. I'm going to run this all the way down, make sure I have the right column this time. Last time I messed that up. User error. Well, I'm going to go all the way down, of course. I'm going to select that, click, and note that we're looking for our hypothesized mean difference is 0. So we're looking at the difference between 0. You're going to have your label selected. Your alpha is 0.05, so this is our p. We're going to compare our p-value to 0.05, and that's going to tell us how significant the strength of this is. And then here I'm going to change, actually, I'm going to keep this gender because I didn't have gender before, and then I'm going to hit OK. So here, as you can see, now I have my worksheet for the t-test. Let me make this a little bigger so that you can see it. And if you recall, there's two things that we want to look at. The first one is the Pearson correlation coefficient. And remember, that is telling us the strength of the correlation between the two variables. In our case, it's state and gender. So the strength is a 0.53. This was actually the highest correlation we had in the database, and it's telling us there's about a medium strength there. They are correlated. There's something there in its medium. So then the next thing you want to look at here is the p-value, the two-tailed t-test that we just ran. And look at this, it's 0.01, so that's very close to 0. So if you recall, our alpha was 0.05. So we compare the alpha to the t-test, and what this is telling us is that if the p-value is less than 0.05, then it is statistically significant. So what can we then deduce from what we just said, the two tests? So we know that there is a positive correlation between whether you live and die and what your gender is, and it's about a medium strength there. But what we also know is that in addition to it be positively correlated and a medium strength, it is statistically significant. Meaning there's not a lot of variability there. But however, when we looked at passenger class and state, it had a correlation, a lower, but there was some correlation there, but it really it's not statistically significant because our p-value is larger than our alpha at 0.05. So if you probably recall this from statistics, going through and trying to understand the validity of our information. So once you have gone through and you've run the t-tests, you've run your correlation table, this part 2 of this assignment is you're going to tell me what variables you looked at. So we looked at state and gender. You're going to type the Pearson correlation. You can grab that either from your t-test or from the correlation table. So that would be 0.32 for passenger class and state. So you can type that in there. You're going to put that in there. You're going to also tell me the p-value. And in this case, passenger class and state, the p-value is 3.63. And then I want you to tell me, is this significant or not? And if you recall, based on alpha, if the p-value is less than your significance level, in our case 0.05, the difference between the means is statistically significant. So in the case of passenger state, and whether they live or die, and the ticket class, it's not. Whereas when we look at the other test we ran, the Pearson correlation for state and gender is a medium strength at a 0.53, so it is correlated, it's positively correlated, and since our p-value is less than 0.05, it is statistically significant. So that is how you are going to create this particular chart. So there's a lot there with correlation, not only understanding the direction and the strength, but also whether or not it's significant. So again, I hope this tutorial was helpful for you, particularly in how to run the statistics. Make sure to save your workbook because you're going to, when we're finished with all this beautiful, sorry, I can't save my workbook. When we're finished with this beautiful analysis, these 3 worksheets and your workbook will be loaded into Canvas to finish assignment number 5. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me via Canvas email and we can connect and set up a time to chat.